The city was drowning in heavy rain. Far above the wet streets, in a small apartment on the 22nd floor, Adrian Cole sat in silence. His hand trembled as he held a photograph. It was Emily, his younger sister, smiling in the sunlight years ago. That smile was gone forever. She had been murdered 3 years earlier, her life stolen by a man who laughed as she bled. Adrian's eyes burned, not with tears but with fire. He whispered, "It's time." The memory returned without mercy. Adrian saw himself running down an alley, too late to save her. Emily lay on the ground, her dress soaked in blood. Standing over her was Richard Vance Jr., son of a senator, untouchable and cruel. Richard had smiled, wiped his shoes and walked away. The police arrived, but everything was silenced by money and power. Judges looked away. Witnesses disappeared. Adrian had begged for justice, but justice never came. That night, he swore to become justice himself. For 3 years, Adrian lived like a ghost. He left his job, sold his belongings, and turned his life into a plan. Every step Richard took, Adrian followed from the shadows. He knew the man's favorite clubs, his secret affairs, his hidden addictions. He learned how Richard trusted no one but still believed no one could touch him. Adrian built his revenge slowly, carefully, like a hunter setting traps for a beast. Every detail mattered. Tonight, the trap would close. The plan began outside an exclusive club downtown. Music and laughter leaked onto the wet street. The black car waited at the curb. Adrian wore the uniform of a private chauffeur, the same badge, the same hat. The real driver was far away, unconscious but safe. Adrian's hands tightened around the wheel. He was no longer Adrian Cole. Tonight, he was a driver. Tonight, he was executioner. The doors burst open. Richard staggered out, drunk, arrogant, throwing cash at the guards. He slid into the back seat without looking at Adrian. "Home," he muttered. The engine roared, and the car rolled into the storm. For a while, Richard didn't notice. He hummed, laughed at his phone, and poured himself another drink from the minibar. But the streets grew darker, emptier. His eyes narrowed. "Hey, driver, this isn't the way." Adrian said nothing. The rain pounded louder. Richard leaned forward, his voice sharper now. "I said this isn't the way to my house. Turn around." Finally, Adrian spoke. His voice was cold, steady. "I know where I'm going." Richard blinked, confusion mixing with fear. He studied the driver's face in the mirror. Recognition hit him. His blood ran cold. "You?" he whispered. "Yes," Adrian answered. The car screeched to a stop inside an abandoned warehouse. Rusted walls echoed with the storm outside. Adrian opened the back door and dragged Richard out. The senator's son shouted, cursed, struggled, but his drunken body was weak. Adrian tied him to a chair beneath a flickering bulb. Shadows danced across Richard's pale face. For the first time, arrogance drained from his eyes. "You'll regret this," Richard spat. "My father will bury you. You'll disappear like your sister." Adrian leaned close, his whisper sharp as a knife. "No. Tonight the world will remember her. And they'll remember you." Adrian pulled out a small recorder and pressed play. The warehouse filled with Richard's own voice, drunken confessions of crimes, bribes, and laughter about Emily's death. Richard shook his head, his face twisted with panic. "No one will believe it. You can't." Adrian raised his phone. The red light blinked. Live. Thousands were already watching. "They don't need to believe," Adrian said, his voice steel. "They only need to hear." Richard's arrogance broke into fear. The storm outside roared louder, as if the city itself waited for the final act. Adrian stood before him, calm and unshaken. "The last debt is here." The flickering bulb swung gently above Richard Vance Jr., casting his pale face into shifting shadows. The ropes dug into his wrists as he struggled, but there was no escape. His arrogance was gone. Sweat rolled down his forehead, mixing with the rainwater on his suit. Across from him, Adrian Cole stood silent, arms crossed, eyes like cold steel. For 3 years, he had dreamed of this moment. Now, watching Richard squirm, it almost didn't feel real. "You thought the world would forget her?" Adrian said softly, his voice carrying more weight than a shout. "But I didn't." Richard's lips trembled. You can't do this." "My father." Adrian stepped closer, cutting him off. "Your father can't save you tonight." Adrian had planned every detail, every second. He wasn't here for quick revenge. He wanted Richard to feel what Emily felt. Fear, helplessness, the slow crawl of death closing in. He circled the chair like a predator, every footstep echoing in the empty warehouse. Richard tried to follow him with his eyes, but the movement only made him look weaker, smaller. "You enjoyed control, didn't you?" Adrian asked. "Money, power, fear. You believed no one could touch you. But tonight—" He paused, leaning close enough for Richard to feel his breath. "You are the one being hunted." Adrian picked up the recorder again. Richard's own voice filled the warehouse, echoing off the walls. Drunken laughter, careless words, detailed confessions of crimes hidden for years. Richard winced with every word, shaking his head like a child refusing to hear. "Stop it," he pleaded. "Stop that now." Adrian ignored him. He held up the phone, the live stream still running. Thousands were watching, the comments racing across the screen. Some were shocked, some furious, some cheering for justice. "Do you hear them?" Adrian asked. "The world finally knows who you are." Richard's breath grew faster. He tugged at the ropes until his skin burned. Panic was eating him alive. "Listen," Richard suddenly shouted, his voice cracking. "I'll give you money, anything you want. Millions. A new life. Just untie me, and we can forget this ever happened." Adrian stopped walking. He stared at Richard for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he shook his head. "You think everything can be bought," Adrian said. "But not this. Not her." Richard swallowed hard, desperation flooding his face. "Please, I didn't mean to." "Don't lie." Adrian cut in sharply, his voice sharp as glass. "You laughed while she died." Richard lowered his eyes. For the first time, guilt flickered across his face, but it was too late. The silence grew heavy. Only the rain outside and the faint hum of the bulb filled the air. Adrian leaned against a steel beam, watching Richard like a man watches an animal in a cage. Richard's breathing grew erratic. His voice cracked. "They'll come looking for me. My guards, my father. Someone will come." Adrian's lips curved into a cold smile. "Do you think I didn't plan for that?" Richard froze. A chill ran down his spine. For the first time, he realized Adrian wasn't acting on rage alone. This was strategy. This was a man who had given up his entire life just for this night. Adrian pulled a chair and sat across from Richard, their eyes locking in the dim light. "Do you know what the worst part was?" Adrian asked, his voice low, almost whispering. "It wasn't watching her die. It was the silence after. The silence of the police. The silence of the courts. The silence of your father's money covering everything." Richard flinched. He had heard accusations before, but never like this. Adrian's words were blades, each one cutting deeper than the last. Adrian leaned forward, his face inches away. "So tonight I will give you silence too. Silence before the end." Adrian stood and reached into his coat. He pulled out a revolver, its steel glinting in the flickering light. Richard's eyes widened, his whole body tensing. But Adrian didn't raise it. Instead, he placed it gently on the floor, just out of Richard's reach. "You will have a choice," Adrian said firmly. "You can pick it up, or wait for me to decide your fate." Richard's chest rose and fell rapidly, his fear filling the room like smoke. The setup was complete. Adrian had placed the weapon, the truth, and the eyes of the world all in Richard's lap. Now the real torment would begin. The warehouse fell into heavy silence. The rain outside tapped against broken glass like a ticking clock. Richard Vance Jr. sat tied to the chair, his eyes locked on the revolver lying on the floor. Sweat rolled down his face, his lips trembling as he whispered curses under his breath. Across from him, Adrian Cole stood calm, his hands behind his back. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He only watched, letting the silence dig deeper into Richard's nerves. The quiet was a weapon sharper than any blade. "You feel it now, don't you?" Adrian said finally. His voice was steady, cold. The weight of helplessness. The same weight Emily felt. Richard's throat tightened. For once, he couldn't speak. Adrian bent down and nudged the revolver a little closer with his foot. The metallic sound scraped against the wet floor. Richard flinched as if the sound itself was a threat. "You wanted power?" Adrian asked. "There it is. All you have to do is take it." Richard shook his head, his eyes wide. I can't. I'm tied." Adrian smirked. "When has a rope ever stopped a desperate man? Show me what your life is worth." Richard pulled hard, the ropes biting into his skin, blood beginning to stain the edges. His face twisted with pain and fear. After minutes of struggling, Richard stopped and slumped back. His chest rose and fell rapidly. Then he forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow. "You won't kill me," he said, trying to sound bold. "You've had your fun. You're streaming this for attention. But in the end, you don't have the guts. You're just a broken man." Adrian tilted his head, studying him with cold amusement. "Is that what you told Emily too? That she was powerless? That her life meant nothing?" The laugh died instantly in Richard's throat. His false confidence cracked. Adrian began to pace slowly, his boots echoing on the concrete. He circled Richard the same way a wolf circles prey. Every step made the ropes feel tighter, every breath harder. "You've lived in a cage of power all your life," Adrian said. "Money, guards, a senator's son. But now the cage is gone. Out here, it's just you and me." Richard tried to follow him with his eyes, but the circling made him dizzy. His chest tightened with fear. He realized Adrian wasn't just after revenge. He wanted to strip him bare, piece by piece, until nothing was left. Finally, Richard snapped. "What do you want from me?" he screamed, his voice echoing off the steel walls. "Do you want me to beg? Fine. I'll beg. Please, don't kill me." His words spilled out like a flood, desperation, promises, even apologies that sounded false. Adrian stopped pacing and leaned down until their faces were inches apart. His eyes burned with 3 years of pain. "I don't want your money. I don't want your apology. I want you to feel everything she felt. Fear, helplessness, the truth that no one is coming to save you." Richard's breath hitched, his body trembling like a cornered animal. Adrian untied one of Richard's hands suddenly. The ropes fell loose on one side. Richard froze, shocked. His free hand twitched toward the revolver on the floor, but fear kept him frozen. Adrian stepped back, arms open, his voice calm. "Go ahead. Take it. Fight for your life." The air thickened. Richard's hand shook violently as he slowly reached toward the weapon. His eyes darted between Adrian's calm stance and the cold steel lying inches away. It felt like a chase, even though neither man moved. The hunt wasn't about running through streets. It was about forcing Richard to confront his own fear. At last, Richard's fingers brushed the revolver. He gripped it clumsily, raising it with shaking hands. The gun felt heavy, foreign. He pointed it toward Adrian, his breath ragged, eyes wide with terror. Adrian didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his calm gaze locked on Richard's trembling hands. His voice was low, deadly. "Do you think pulling that trigger will save you? Or will it only prove to the world what you truly are? A coward with blood already on his hands." The flickering bulb cast long shadows across both men. One was shaking, desperate, on the edge of breaking. The other stood calm, steady, his eyes sharp as a predator's. The hunt was no longer about flesh. It was about the soul. And Richard's soul was cornered. The revolver shook in Richard's hands. His fingers were slick with sweat, his knuckles white as he tried to keep the weapon steady. Across the warehouse, Adrian Cole stood calm, his dark coat dripping rainwater onto the concrete floor. He didn't flinch, didn't move, only watched. "Shoot," Adrian said softly, his voice echoing against the steel beams. "If you think it will save you, Then pull the trigger. Richard's chest heaved. The weight of the gun felt heavier than his guilt. He raised it higher, but the muzzle trembled as his fear grew. Richard's lips shook as he tried to speak. You want me to kill you? That's your plan. Adrian's eyes narrowed. No. My plan is for the world to see who you are. If you kill me, you prove it. If you don't, they still see you for the coward you've always been. Richard swallowed hard. The live-streaming phone on the table glowed red, capturing every second. Thousands of comments scrolled, their judgment raining down harsher than the storm outside. His reputation, his life, his future. All of it balanced on the shaking barrel of a gun. Adrian took a slow step closer. The shadows stretched behind him like wings of judgment. Richard's eyes widened as he tightened his grip on the gun. Stay back, Richard shouted, his voice breaking. I'll do it. Adrian stopped, tilting his head. Then do it. The silence that followed was deafening. The rain dripped through broken windows, tapping like a countdown. Richard's hand trembled, but the trigger never moved. His eyes darted away from Adrian's piercing stare, as if the weight of those eyes was more dangerous than the weapon in his grip. Richard's strength broke. The revolver slipped from his sweaty hands, clattering onto the floor with a metallic echo that rang like a verdict. His chest collapsed forward, and his head dropped into his lap. I didn't mean to, he whispered, his voice small, pathetic. It was just a joke. I didn't mean to. Adrian's jaw clenched. He bent down, lifting Richard's chin until their eyes met. Say her name, Adrian ordered. Richard hesitated, his lips trembling. Finally, the word escaped like poison. Emily. Adrian's stare hardened. She begged you for mercy. You laughed. Tonight, no one laughs. Adrian picked up the revolver from the floor and placed it back on the table, next to the glowing phone. The audience was still watching, silent now, as if waiting for the final act. You wanted the world to fear you, Adrian said, his voice calm but sharp. Now they see the truth. A spoiled child, hiding behind his father's name. A murderer who thought money was a shield. Richard shook his head violently, tears mixing with sweat. Please don't. Don't do this. I'll confess. I'll tell everything. Adrian's eyes didn't soften. You already did. Adrian lifted the gun and pressed it into Richard's hands again. Richard's arms shook like branches in a storm. This time, Adrian whispered, you choose, end your life, or face the world tomorrow when this truth spreads like fire. Either way, your judgment is here. Richard stared at the weapon as though it were a serpent ready to strike. His breathing grew frantic. He looked at the phone, at Adrian, at the dripping ceiling, anywhere but at himself. The walls closed in, the shadows heavy, the choice suffocating. For a long moment, nothing moved. The warehouse was frozen in silence. Time stretched thin. Then, a single gunshot exploded, echoing through the steel bones of the building. The flickering bulb swayed, smoke curling upward in the dim light. Adrian didn't blink. His eyes stayed on Richard, whose body slumped in the chair, the gun slipping from lifeless fingers. The phone continued to stream, capturing the final moment. The comments flooded, voices of the world witnessing justice. Adrian turned away, his steps heavy but steady. The storm outside raged, but inside, the judgment was complete. The warehouse was still. Smoke from the gunshot curled in the stale air, rising toward the swinging bulb. Richard's lifeless body slumped in the chair, his expensive suit stained, his face frozen in terror. The revolver rested on the floor beside him, gleaming faintly under the weak light. Adrian stood over him, unmoving. The sound of the shot still echoed in his ears. For years he had dreamed of revenge, and now it lay before him, quiet, final. But instead of satisfaction, the silence felt heavier than ever. He whispered to himself, Emily, it's done. On the metal table, the phone still glowed red, live-streaming everything to thousands. Adrian stepped forward and picked it up. The comments were endless. Some horrified, some calling it justice, others in disbelief. For the first time, the world had seen the truth that money could not bury. Adrian ended the stream with a single tap. The screen went dark, but the weight of what had been shown could not be erased. Somewhere, people were already downloading, sharing, spreading the evidence. The powerful Vance family could not silence this storm. Adrian put the phone in his pocket. Justice had finally escaped the cage. The warehouse doors groaned as Adrian pushed them open. Outside, the storm raged with merciless force. Rain lashed the ground, thunder cracked across the sky, and lightning lit the empty streets in violent flashes. Adrian stepped into the rain, letting it soak him completely. It felt like the sky itself was washing away the blood, the lies, the years of silence. For the first time, he didn't hide from it. Every drop reminded him of Emily. The storm sounded like her voice, calling, weeping, then quiet again. Adrian lifted his face to the sky and closed his eyes. By morning, the world had changed. News stations everywhere repeated the same story. Senator's son exposed in live-streamed confession and death. The footage was impossible to suppress. Clips spread like wildfire, shared across every screen, every corner of the internet. Crowds gathered outside the Vance estate, demanding answers. Protesters shouted Emily's name, holding signs that said, "Justice for the forgotten." The senator appeared on television, pale and broken, insisting he knew nothing. His empire, once untouchable, began to collapse. The world finally saw what Adrian had always known. The powerful were not gods, and the truth had teeth. But for Adrian, the victory was not simple. Alone in his apartment, he sat by the same desk where Emily's photograph lay. He stared at her smile, untouched by the cruelty of the world. He had hunted for 3 years, lived only for revenge. Now the prey was gone. The hunt was over. But what was left for the hunter? Adrian whispered, "I did it, Emily. I made him pay." His voice cracked. But why does it still hurt? Revenge had filled the silence, but it did not heal the emptiness. That night, a knock rattled his apartment door. Adrian froze, his mind sharp again. Slowly, he approached and opened it. 2 detectives stood there, their coats dripping from the rain. One of them spoke firmly. "Adrian Cole, you need to come with us." Adrian's heart didn't race. He had expected this. The live stream had exposed Richard, but it had also exposed him. He nodded calmly, grabbed his coat, and followed them into the night. The city lights blurred through the rain as the car drove away. Justice had a price, and Adrian was ready to pay it. In the days that followed, the story grew larger than Adrian himself. People didn't talk only about Richard's crimes, they talked about Emily, about the silence of the system, about corruption finally being dragged into the light. Some called Adrian a murderer. Others called him a hero. But no one ignored him. His sister's name was on every screen, her face on every banner. She was no longer forgotten. Sitting in a cell, Adrian smiled faintly. He had lost everything, but he had given Emily justice. His revenge was not just against Richard, it was against the silence of the world. And that revenge had finally spoken loud enough to be heard. Adrian Cole sat on the hard bed in his narrow prison cell. The gray walls closed in, bare except for a single barred window where faint sunlight tried to enter. In his hands he held nothing, just silence. For weeks he had been here, away from the storm he unleashed. But even in silence, Emily's name traveled outside. Her story was no longer buried. Protesters still chanted for justice. The truth had escaped, and no cell could cage it. Adrian leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. Across the city, televisions still played the live-streamed recording. In bars, homes, and schools, people watched Richard's final night. Children whispered Emily's name in classrooms. Strangers lit candles in alleys where she once walked. Adrian's face became a symbol. Half called him murderer, half called him hero. But all of them watched. Even in chains, he had become the center of judgment. His revenge had turned into something bigger than himself. And in the halls of power, men like Richard's father trembled. If one son could fall, others could too. One rainy afternoon, The sound of keys turned in Adrian's cell. A guard stepped aside, and a woman walked in. She wore a long coat, her eyes sharp but tired. "I'm Detective Hall," she said, pulling a chair. "You changed everything, Mr. Cole." Adrian studied her, silent. She placed a folder on the table. Inside were photos, protests, headlines, other politicians under investigation. "Your act started a fire. People won't let it die." Adrian's voice was calm. "Emily deserved a voice. That's all I wanted." Detective Hall nodded. "And now the world is listening." That same night, news erupted. Senator Vance, Richard's father, stepped down in disgrace. Evidence of bribes and cover-ups surfaced. Proof long buried but now dragged into light by public fury. Adrian heard the news through a crackling prison radio. He didn't smile, didn't celebrate. He only whispered, "The debts are paid." The walls of the powerful were crumbling. The empire that had stolen Emily's life was finally collapsing. But in the stillness of his cell, Adrian faced a different battle. Revenge had been his purpose for 3 years. Every breath, every step, every plan had been for this night. Now it was over. Without Emily, without the hunt, what was left? His body lived, but his heart felt empty. He stared at the ceiling, listening to distant footsteps in the prison halls. "Emily?" he whispered. "Did I do right?" The silence answered him. But inside, he felt her presence, lighter now, not as pain, but as memory. Weeks later, Adrian's lawyer visited with unexpected news. "There's talk," the lawyer said, "of reducing your sentence. Some see you as a criminal. Others see you as the man who exposed corruption no one else dared to touch." Adrian leaned forward, his eyes steady. "I don't care about freedom. I care that they remember her." The lawyer sighed. "They will. Emily's name is everywhere now. People are demanding change." She became the spark. Adrian sat back. For once, his heart felt lighter. He had nothing left to fight for, but Emily had already won. One quiet evening, as the sun set outside the barred window, Adrian sat with his back against the wall. The sky was painted red and gold, the light cutting through the cell bars, stripes of fire across his face. He closed his eyes, breathing slow. In his mind, Emily's laughter returned, clear and warm, not broken by screams or blood. He smiled faintly, whispering, "I'll see you again." The guards found him the next morning, peaceful, still, as if he had finally rested after a long hunt. Outside the prison, people lit candles again, not just for Emily, but now for Adrian. His revenge had ended his life, but it had given the world a truth it could no longer hide. The hunter was gone, but his judgment remained.